Hey, what's up, everybody? Today I'm going to be sharing with you a video that I did with a seasoned title rep, Tamara Ortiz. We are going over title insurance. We're going to go over the importance of title insurance, what can happen to you if you don't have title insurance. Everybody, when they buy and they sell real estate, they always think about, oh, title insurance, it's just a fee, it's something that we have to pay. But there's a lot of behind the stuff that goes on behind the scenes in title, and there's a lot of horror stories that are out there for people that buy real estate without title insurance, or somebody records a deed against their property. What happens in things like that? We are going to be interviewing Tamara, and she's going to tell us exactly what title insurance companies do to fix those situations or help customers, buyers, and sellers when things like that happen. So make sure you stay tuned all the way to the end, because the good stuff's always at the end. All right, guys, stay tuned. All right, everybody, thanks for joining me today. I have the amazing pleasure of talking with Tamara Ortiz, seasoned title rep extraordinaire from Fidelity Title. Tamara, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today. If you'd like to maybe just chime in real quick, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how long you've been in the business.
Oh gosh, I've been in the business a long time. I'm going on, well, I've been in it 29 years. And in those 29 years, I've seen 3 up markets and 2 down markets, and the interest rate go from start at 13% all the way down to 2%.
Wow, what a range, right? Now,
Yeah.
have you always been in title, or have you bounced around in different industries in real estate?
No, I've always been in title. I came up here to be in someone's wedding, someone that I've known since grade school, and I was having lunch and her boss was like, "You need to work for me." And I'm like, "Well, what do you do?" And he told me about it, gave me a stack of cards and just said, "Go out and make friends." And that at that time, back in the late 80s, you just went around and, you made friends and you learned very quickly. So I learned a great deal from the beginning, from A to Z, everything.
Love it. So today's topic is really going to be on title insurance, maybe a real quick overview of why it's important, or, because, in real estate, you always tell a buyer, well, you have title, you have escrow fees. You tell a seller, you have title, you have escrow fees. But I don't know that the consumer really understands the value of title insurance. What do they do? As a real estate agent, I'll be honest with you, like, I kind of wonder, like, well, wait a minute, you get to screen the buyer, you get to screen the seller, and you know everything about them. Then you're going to say, okay, I'll issue this insurance. Like, what type of liability does a title insurance kind of have when they get to do all their due diligence on somebody? But, what is title insurance? Like, what is so important about it?
Well, that's a good question, and a good question to what you were just mentioning. So title insurance, number one, if a person is getting a loan, right, they're buying or selling a house, right? But we'll say for a buyer, they're buying a house and they get a loan, it is required. It's required that the lender will not loan money without there being a title policy. And the reason for that is to protect their money that they're loaning, and to protect it means the title company is going to, like you said, they're going to vet that person. They're going to get a statement of information on the person that is borrowing the money. They want to make sure they don't have any tax liens that sometimes don't show up in a prelim. It will show up on them under their Social Security. So we do everything in our power to make sure that, that this person doesn't own anything. And that way also that these people are going to be in first position and whatnot.
Right. So you're saying that the title insurance, or the lenders, want to make sure that they're protected. So there's a separate policy for a buyer. The ALTA policy is kind of what you're talking about. And that is ensuring really the lender then that they're in a first position on this property. So that keeps a buyer from, like, going to Bank of America and getting a first trust deed and then going to Wells Fargo at the same time.
Exactly.
And putting $400,000 onto the property, and then them, I guess, taking the cash and running away, huh?
That you couldn't have said that better. Spot on. That's actually exactly why. Yeah,
And
that's
then
exactly why.
the owner's policy protects the buyer then as being the new buyer of record.
Correct. So the owner's policy comes in there's two policies. There's what's current right now that's in the contract, says there's an Alta homeowner's policy, and the homeowner's policy is the best policy out there right now. So it's the Alta homeowner's policy or the CLTA homeowner's policy. The difference is one is America Land Title Association and the other is California Land Title Association. As long as it says homeowner's policy on either one of them, that's when you're getting the best policy. So what happens is that, yes, when we insure a buyer, and then of course we also insure the seller as well. So the buyer and the seller are both protected. So let's say I'm selling my house and you're buying my house. And we go through title insurance, right? And we fill out all the necessary information to make sure that I don't have any tax liens and everything's okay and that, and they issue title. That title insurance will stay for both people until that buyer sells the property. So let's just say it was a new home, or even if it wasn't a new home, let's say that I sold my property to you and I put the fence up, right? I put a fence up. And every time the new buyer waters, the water just goes under the fence. It wasn't done right. It just floods the person next door, whatever. And they call their title insurance company, right? And say, hey, look, this person put a fence up. What happens is when you have title insurance, the title insurance companies, right? Or even if somebody just calls our title insurance company and puts a claim in, we're going to then go to bat and try and figure out a way to resolve the issue. Maybe it's just that we put up a new fence, we have it redone. We obviously have to make sure it's in the right place. There's several things that go on with that, but it does protect the buyer and the seller.
Interesting. So I guess, when you said that, I thought I would call my homeowner's fire insurance policy State Farm or Allstate, but you're saying title insurance has some responsibility or I don't say liability, but they have where you could file a claim with your title insurance company as well for something like that.
Yes, sometimes they're not always, obviously it's just like any insurance company. They have to look at it, were you aware of it when you bought it? Did you have any idea? In that case, if it's flooding underneath, they wouldn't have had any idea. But, there's obviously different scenarios as to, why they'll say yes and why they'll say no. But there are several things covered in the policy that have a deductible. So let's just say we said, okay, we're going to go ahead and issue the new fence for $4,000. And I'm being hypothetical here.
Yeah.
And it's $900 deductible. We'll take out the $900 and give you the rest and you can do it, or we come up with some situation. But it's not always just on a fence. There's several things that are covered. And again, when people purchase a property, sometimes they're told by the buyer or the seller agent, I'm sorry, by the seller or the seller's agent that, they disclose that, the fence may not be on the property line. So obviously, if it comes to a claim to title and we look at it and go, you knew it wasn't on the property line, then of course it would be questionable whether it would be covered or not.
I'm going to go a little bit off topic because as you brought this up, it made me think about a conversation you and I had a while back about one of our agents in our office had something where the garage was converted illegally or something, or it was done without permit. And the city came and wanted them to tear it down or put it back. And I remember the agent or the owner of that property filed a claim with title insurance, and the title insurance actually covered, I guess minus a deductible, the cost of doing that. Share with us a little bit. They have some responsibility and things like that. And that was my 25 years of selling. I never knew that title insurance kind of handled those things. Yeah.
Yes, on certain things, again, there's a very, very long list under the ALTA homeowners coverage that of things that fall under that, right? That would be one. Obviously, again, if a person purchased a property having no idea, which happens quite a bit, having no idea that garage was converted, right? And then the city somehow, maybe a neighbor turns them in or something, and they're asked to take it down. Yes, there's a certain, I want to say, I believe it's 25,000 with a less a $5,000 deductible, but I can't say exact. I'd have to be looking at it. But again, it goes with exactly what we just spoke about, the fence. They're an insurance company. They're going to look at it and see, as to how much you knew about it, didn't know about it. Obviously, if you're buying something and you're well aware of it, then it doesn't mean that they won't cover it. Just means that they could possibly not. But it's interesting you said that. I just had this issue with somebody who didn't use me for title, but the good thing about it was they were representing the buyer and the seller chose title. And the people went in to put in a pool at their property. And when the city came out to get it permitted, they said, well, we can't issue it until you take down the carport. And they just bought the property. They're like, what? Carport? And they explained to them, yes. And we told the seller they needed to take it down, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, the agent called me and what do I do? And I said, well, I can't guarantee it will happen, but you should definitely turn it into your title insurance, to your title company. Luckily, it was one of our brands. Fidelity National Title Fidelity National Financial has different brands underneath it. And it was one of those. And believe it or not, because they had no idea about it. And I can't really say why they said yes or not, but theirs was, I think it was, again, I think it was a $25,000 deductible, I believe, with a $25,000 with a $5,000 deductible. These people were thrilled because they just got, half their pool paid. So
wow.
they're very happy.
So, I mean, there are a lot of things, and coverage wise that title insurance does take, I guess, some exposure away from a buyer when buying some real estate that way.
Yes.
That kind of leads me into a question that, I wanted to ask you. I had it on my notes list over here. Is there's so many title companies out here, a Fidelity and a Gateway and an Equity. And it's like, are they all the same? Like,
well, that's a good question.
Title insurance is title insurance, no? Or tell us.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's a good question. Yes. There's some things that you want to look at when you do get purchase a property, or even when you sell a property, but mostly when you're purchasing a property. And, all buyers have to sign something in escrow saying that they have viewed the preliminary title report, which is what we put out before they buy it. And in there is when they want to look for where it says homeowner's policy. They want to make sure that it says that, or they want to, some different title companies call it different things. Somebody calls it the Eagle Plus. That's a question where I would probably tell anyone to just, give a shout out to their agent. Hey, can you ask escrow and make sure that this is the, the ALTA or CLTA homeowners policy, because that's the one that has the most coverage.
Okay.
When I started, they only had the CLTA policy and the coverage was about like this. Now, then it went to an ALTAR like this. And now it went to, it now went to that. So it went, over the years, it's really gotten a lot of good pluses as to why, you have title insurance. The difference between companies. So you have 3 to 4 main title companies. So our company, Fidelity National Financial, or Fidelity Title, they are the largest title company in the nation. And then under us, we have different sister companies. We have our Fidelity brand, our Lawyers Title brand, Chicago, Ticor, et cetera. So as does, First American. They also have First American Title Corporation, and then under it, they have First American, and they have other companies that fall underneath that, other title companies. So you could say that those companies that are underneath it, are underwritten companies. The good thing about it for all buyers and sellers is that when you're represented by one of these top companies, you have the weight of our company behind them. Gotcha. Right? You have the weight of our company behind them. So I would probably say, and, also I would say the difference between them sometimes, most of the time, is financial. Like, how big is your company? We're a $7.2 billion company, Fidelity,
Gotcha.
Fidelity National Financial, right? So different companies, and as you get into companies that are, that are, I want to say smaller, I guess, maybe they don't have as much, financial
Backing.
backing. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, it really comes down to who you work with matters. To be honest with you, I would think that, your real estate agent, number one, and
Yeah.
that real estate agent, like yourself, has strong relationships with the best, the best title companies. And the difference is also, like I say, who you work with is how much that person's going to go to bat, right?
Gotcha.
So our company and myself, I mean, I never take no for an answer. So if there's an issue on a file, I just keep going back. I'm like, my boss is like, God, you're like the second wife that drives me nuts. But I just go back because I've been in it so long that I know that there's a solution to every problem. There's no way that a house just can't sell it all, right? There's a solution. Sometimes the solution isn't really great. Like they might not, the seller might not love it, that they have to, bond around something on a loan that can't be found or something. But
Gotcha.
that's the difference really, is who you work with matters. I think like agents.
So for the most part, if a buyer is looking or getting offered, the seller's choosing title insurance and they're telling them they're using Eagle title insurance, the idea is for that consumer to make sure that that company is underwritten by a bigger reputable brand that's going to have someone to stand behind them in the case things like that happen. Like as long as that company's underwritten by a Fidelity or a First American or a bigger brand, there's a good chance they're going to be safe.
Yes, correct. There is a good chance they're going to be, of course. Like I say, when it comes down to it and it goes to claims, it's all going through, when you're under one of our brands, it's always going into the same underwriter that, that we go under, our same people. Gotcha. So again, it comes into who you work with matters. Again, the agent.
Title insurance also protects the consumer when they get it from unpaid liens and things that might have slipped through the crack, right? I mean, I remember a client of mine one day said after he moved in, knock on the door, and Uncle Joe was there saying this was my nephew's house and he owed me $50,000 and you guys should have paid me from the sale of his house. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? And, I called the rep at that time, and I guess it was title insurance job to make sure that they covered this claim from Uncle Joe because, I mean, things like that happen. Someone can knock on your door and say, oh, that Tom Hernandez guy who was the owner, he owed me $1 million. Like what happens in scenarios like that?
100%. Those are called matters that are on and off record. Okay. On record means that matters that when we research a property that they come up, we see them, right? And those would be a matter that's off record. So we have to see, did it have the right APN number? I mean, it still doesn't mean that it's not valid, 100%. But yes, 100%, you are covered for matters, that are on and off public record.
So in that case, if Uncle Joe turned out to really be rightfully owed this money, the title insurance company would have to eat that payoff because they failed to do it or catch it during the process.
If we failed to catch it during our time that we were transferring the sale, or we were investigating, not investigating, but we were researching, right, the seller, absolutely. If we forgot, or again, there can be different scenarios because that can come up because sometimes, it can come up for different reasons. But correct, yes, the title company would definitely be something that we would jump in and be looking at to take care of.
What is like the number one claim that title insurance, like, oh no, here we go again, or that they see the most of, like you always hear, is it fraud or, like what's the biggest payoff that these title insurance, they got us again?
Fraud.
Like what kind of fraud? Like
all kinds of fraud.
I mean, people impersonating other people? Or...
Yes, correct. So a husband signing on behalf of a wife, right? Maybe he had somebody else sign the document. A wife signing on behalf of her husband. I can't believe you brought this up. What a great question. So I just had one that we were doing a deal, and in the deal, we get the paperwork, right? And the mother passed away. Okay, it should have gone to probate because the mother passed away.
Right.
And it was not in a trust. And all of a sudden, a person came up and said, a person that was part of the transaction said, wait a minute, I notarized this deed, and there was a lot of children involved. I can't remember how many, but there was more than one. The mother had more than one child. All of a sudden she said, wait, no, I notarized one of the family members, a daughter-in-law, something like that.
Said, oh, I got a deed over here that I had in the drawer.
Exactly.
Mom notarized it.
That happened. Okay. So that's a great example. That's exactly, you know what, she did it. And that happens sometimes. Sometimes people do get a document, especially when their parents, if they get ill and before they get too sick, they do something. And, you know, the consumers just don't realize that you have to get that recorded right away. It's very important, right? For this exact issue. But what happened in this case was, it was brought to my attention and the title officer said, hey, you know, I know you know the parties to this transaction, but can you take a look at this? To me, it doesn't look right. So I started looking at it and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. That's definitely not the signature of the mother. Now, it wasn't my call. And of course, I want to do everything in the power to help anything close. But once we looked at it, so I just happened to just be sitting around. I just Googled the girl's name who signed, right? Who was supposed to be inheriting the property.
And it matched her signature.
A long list. And so did her husband, of fraud. And guess what? For signing on other people's behalf. I was like, oh my gosh. So had that one gone through, there's a perfect example. And I'm sure they're peddling it to a bunch of different companies to try and get it done.
Gotcha.
But I'm sure had that gone through, that, I mean, it clearly was fraud. There's no doubt about it.
What does the title company do? They say, no, we're not insuring this deal.
Correct.
Sorry.
Correct.
Gotcha.
We say, no, we're not insuring the deal. Yeah, of course. We had to, I mean, luckily for me, the parties completely understood. I mean, completely understood.
Yeah.
This was just on a refinance. It wasn't a sale. This was on a refinance. But yes, we have to say, you know, I'm sorry. And we welcome them. Please, you know, you're welcome to take it somewhere else, but it's not something we're going to accept.
You know, I think this is going to segue into a topic that I wanted to make sure we talk about. But, you know, I'm one of those guys, and I'll be honest, I've got a deed in my safe that's deeded to my son, Matt, that says, hey, sucker, something goes wrong. You go take that thing and you go record it.
Exactly.
But I mean, I notarized that deed probably 8 years ago. What would happen if God forbid something happens and Matt goes and records it in 2022? Does the property, it's his now, right? I mean,
if Matt, okay, there's a couple things. That's a great question. Okay. So if Matt goes down, he just remembered, God, I've been meaning to do this. I put it off, and he goes down the county recorder and he takes that deed and he shows his license and he records it, right? It's now on the property, which is great. But that's called an uninsured deed. It's uninsured. They did not go through title insurance to clear off yourself or whoever was on it before, the prior person. This goes for anybody. The part of title insurance that we do is we do our due diligence by asking for a statement of information for the buyer, from the buyer and the seller. It has their name, different places they've lived in the last 5 years, or Social Security, and we run all that because we have to make sure that there's not child support owed, there's not taxes, you know, federal or state taxes owed or anything. So we run those. So in that case, when we see that, that's called an uninsured deed, right? We have no knowledge if he just, especially if a person, let's just say in this scenario, right? Especially in this scenario where Matt's your son, but God forbid if you pass, how do we know he just didn't, like it looks suspicious when you have a deed that hasn't been done in years.
Gotcha.
So there's a perfect example of who you work with matters. You gotta, you know, you really have to look at it as to why, what title companies may say you need to call an attorney and go to court. So you need to get an attorney and go to court and tell the attorney, you know what, my father gave that to me 8 years ago. Here's a signature on his original deed. Here's the signature on this. You know, they can look at it. A judge can look at it and see that they're right, and he'll make the determination. And the problem comes in is if there's other children. That's when the problem comes in. So let's say that you, in your case where you have more than one child, well, that's hard because you know what? Matt's gonna say, well, he gave it to me, and your other son's gonna come up and go, wait a minute, he told me I was getting it.
Yeah.
Then there's a big problem. Then it's like, you have to go through a lot of times. It depends how you were holding title. If you're holding title as your name and a single man, or your name as a married man, then it becomes into issues. If you're holding it as you and a married person, like a wife and her husband as a married couple, then of course, if the husband is no longer here, then obviously it has to go to court a lot of times in that, because a lot of people ask us, how come you won't accept the will? Because most people have a will. How come you won't accept the will? Well, because we have no idea. The will really could have been drawn up, the day before they contacted us. So we have no way of knowing. And the best way to protect anyone in those scenarios is to make sure that they put their property in a trust, because a trust clearly states who the trustees are, who gets what's going on. And that's why title companies will not accept a will. If we see it, like my house right now, I had to take it out of my trust because I was doing a refinance and put it in my name.
Right.
So I have not, here we go, right? Here's a great scenario. I have not put it back into my trust. If something was to happen to me and I'm holding as myself, my son will have to go to probate, and I'm in title insurance.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Can I record a deed like that with title insurance, or does it need to be a
No.
sale or a buy, right? I just can't call you up and say, Tamara, I got this deed. I want to record the property to my son. How much for a policy of title insurance, right? It's not like that.
I probably, great question. I probably get that at least twice a month. Sometimes I get it, it depends on which month it is. Sometimes I get the question on like every 2 weeks, but I get that question a lot, saying, no, I don't want to use escrow. I just want to do it. I understand. Title insurance cannot issue a title policy without it going through escrow, right? Because if there's they just can't. They're not going to go. They have to look around to see. I want to say there's one company out of the 16 or 17 that are left that it's a much lower, it's a little title company that may do that, but no, for the most part, no, you can't just go and get title insurance for that.
This kind of plays into that same scenario in that, like, I'm a savvy real estate investor. I just met a client and I say, hey man, I'll buy your house. Let's avoid title. Let's avoid escrow. You want 500 for it. I'll give you 500 here. Here's your cash. You give me a deed. I go down, I record it. Now I go rehab the house, and now it's 18 months later. I go to put the house on the market. I put it in escrow. Bam, I'm stuck with a uninsured deed.
Exactly. Actually, go ahead. Sorry.
What are you guys now going to tell me, Tom? Hey, you better hunt down that seller and hope he hasn't added any more debt to his.
That is exactly what we're going to say to you. But rather than saying it, if you're at two scenarios, if you're in escrow, we're going to ask, one of the requirements on our prelim is going to say that we need an affidavit from the seller. And an signed affidavit from the seller, escrow will try and find the seller. Again, that takes some work too. Sometimes people have moved all over, especially if it's been a long period of time, and God hope they're still alive.
Right.
Okay. That's a big problem too. But what happens is that, yes, escrow is going to try and track down, as well as title, try and track down that seller. And escrow will prepare an affidavit for them to sign saying that they did sell you the property, or whomever the property. And the reason we do that is to protect people so that they don't lose their homes, right? Because of fraud. We want to make sure that whoever it is, let's just say it's you, it's easy, that you are aware that your house is being sold, because you would be shocked every once in a while we get, what do you mean my house is being sold? Like, what are you talking about? But it doesn't happen very often, but it happens.
So you're right. Somebody could take my address, get a deed, find some unscrupulous notary, sign it, go record it. It transferred to somebody else. I'm living in the house. I have no idea that my property is not in my name anymore. And now this guy put the house on the market, sold it, and now someone's knocking on my door going, hey, I want to see. So that is for my protection, that affidavit, because then I could come back and say, wait a minute, escrow company, I never sold my house to this guy. And I would be able to challenge that deed.
100%. And that
Wow, I
brings
never
to
thought about it like that.
yeah, and that brings to a really good question, or question. So there's two things there. One, I buy a property from somebody, right? I buy a piece of vacant land for, whatever, $10,000, right? She gives me the deed. I say, great. I go and record it. I mean, I know better, but I go and record it. It's in my name. I think everything's great. Now I put a house on that property, right? And let's say it was wherever, when prices are that low, they're not in Los Angeles, they're way out. But let's just say now I build a house on it, right? And I sell it. Well, when I go to sell it, even though I went down legally, I rightfully, I should say, and recorded a document that I paid for and I did it, it was all right. The person who owned that land is still not been removed. So it goes back to what we're saying. We have to find her because we have to get her to sign an affidavit, not only that she sold the property, which is to protect the title company and to protect those that have properties, but also here's the worst case scenario that all of a sudden, because there was no title insurance at the time that I bought it, right? I just took the deed and went and recorded it. What happens if that person I bought it from now has a federal tax lien and they had it, right? They still have not legally come off title. So they have it. So those things have to be dealt with.
Wow.
I mean, meaning we would say, unfortunately, we have to pay this. It has to be paid, right? And then you have to go after the person and blah, blah, blah. So it's best in all scenarios, that when you get a property from a person that you buy cash, especially, I find people purchasing properties for $500,000. I mean, that's not a little bit of money. 500,000. And they still I don't want to go through title escrow. I don't want to pay the money. And I say, okay, not a problem, but you better hope that person doesn't get anything on themselves, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times there's child support, right? Child support and federal and state tax liens are two things the title companies cannot ignore, no matter what. I mean, mostly title companies will not ignore anything when there's a lien on the property, but those are two things that are very serious.
Gotcha.
Okay. But it also goes in what you just said as well. This is the other part. In my 29 years or my 30 years, I've never heard of a person being able to take over someone's property. I mean, meaning a person that really had no right to it, right?
Right.
I had never heard of the fact of somebody putting on a deed on a property, right? Like you said, finding a fraudulent notary or whatever, putting a deed on a property. But in the last 2 years, I've seen six in the last 2 years. And within the last couple of years, there's something came out called, I think it's called title lock, 1495, and they'll watch your property and all that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, it's the reason that came about, right? Just like watching your credit, right? We pay to have our credit watched, is because it's happening more and more. So this happened to somebody I knew. They called me and said, hey, a realtor just came in my door, asked me if I wanted to sell, and she called me by a different name. Like literally, this just happened. And I said, and I know this person, I said, what are you talking about? I looked at her and said, well, I'm the owner. Well, not according to this. And she showed on her phone and said, it shows this one. So he called me immediately and he said, can you look it up? I did. And I said, oh, you have a fraudulent deed on there.
Wow.
I said, somebody put it on. He goes, what do I have to do? I said, you have to go and report to the police immediately.
Wow.
If you cannot find, obviously you want to be careful going to those type of people's homes and that. But anyways, you need to get an attorney. I told them who, and then they did. And, this is the problem. Once someone does that, even though it's fraud, time is of the essence that you get a lis penance or something to stop that. You've got to get some action. An attorney has to do some action, or you have to file some action to make sure that people know that that's fraudulent. Okay. Because if you don't, let's just hypothetically say, and I can say this straight from a top attorney who was dealing with one on me a few years ago, who was dealing with one, and I was the title person. If that fraudulent person who put it on there goes and sells it, it's very difficult for you as the homeowner who originally owned the house to get it back. And the reason is because that third party had no idea. But again, between you and I, if they happen to do that through title insurance, that would never happen because title insurance would never do it without getting a signed signature. So again, that's another reason why to have it.
Gotcha. Makes sense. I know we're winding down. I know you're busy. I got one last question for you, maybe two, but the one big one is, you always hear, I got in a fight with my contractor over some work and he's going to file a lien against my property, or I'm going to put a list pendants, or you're in some transaction and so they're uninsured, right? According to you, they didn't call up a title insurance company and say, hey, I want to record this judgment against Tom or what. How does title insurance protect us against stuff like that, or what happens? You always hear that.
Okay, so do you mean by like a list? Well, it goes for both mechanics lien or like a list pendant. So you
I guess I normally hear from mechanics liens, probably a contractor did some work. You didn't like the way the work was. You didn't want to pay him, and then he's telling you he's gonna slap a lien against you.
Okay, great question. Great question. So when they file a lien against your property, and we see a mechanics lien, right? We do the preliminary title report when you go to sell a property, escrow orders it, and we see on the preliminary title report that there's a mechanics lien. Mechanics liens are good for 90 days. So meaning before the 90 days is up, whoever put that mechanics lien on there, they need to file an action. They either need to refile it, which will make it now as of, today's date. They need to refile it, or a lot of people will go and just file a lawsuit on that stating to that mechanics lien. And that makes it, have longevity. Okay.
Gotcha.
But I've had a few of those last year too. Somebody called me and said, hey, and a really good person said, hey, I did some work on this property. The person, whatever they said was difficult, whatever, but I put a lien on the property. I was owed $175,000 and they sold the property. How come I wasn't paid? And luckily I hadn't done the title, but I looked at it and said, well, let me ask you something. Did you do anything after the 90 days that you filed it? He goes, no, I just filed it. They owe me the money. I filed the lien. Title companies after 90 days, it can be no longer valid.
So there's no
without
obligation
some type
for
of
the
an
title
action.
company after 90 days to even go back to this other person and say, hey, did he pay you? Did he not pay you? Does he still owe you? If you haven't done anything after 90 days, it just falls off, so to speak.
It can fall off. Yes. Yes, it will. Yes. I mean, there's always different scenarios. It really depends probably. But yes, the bottom line is yes. Correct.
And then I guess you always hear in real estate, as far as us in the business, seller wants to cancel escrow. The buyer is really not performing. And the buyer throws a tantrum and says, I'm going to put a list pendants on your property. You'll never sell this home. Is that the same thing? He's got 90 days with the list pendants as well to put some type of action, whether a court action or something viable to keep me from selling that house, or?
Well, that's a good question. So a list pendants would be different.
Okay.
Somebody throws a list pendants on your house, right? No, we have to deal with that. We have to deal with that. We need a release of lien. So it really depends what it is. So a mechanics lien is just what we talked about, right? The 90 days. But when it's a list pendants or something like that, that's something that we're going to have to get on that particular scenario. We would ask for a release of lien. We would ask for something stating that that person was paid, because this is basically more like a lawsuit, even though it isn't it, but it's a list pendants is a specific action, alerting. So it's not necessarily that 90 days, that's going to be removed at all.
Got you.
More than likely
Even
not.
if the guy was even fraudulent, or there was no basis for his claim, I'm still going to have to find this guy and deal with this guy to get some type of release, or hire attorneys to fight for me to get it. I mean, can you get them dismissed?
Yep, 100%, because we have no idea whether, we're not a court. A title company is not there to distinguish whether you say one thing, they say the other. we're like, no, we need a release of lien because we're not there to dictate who's right and who's wrong. God forbid a title company ever pick the wrong person. So we don't, it's a claim. So we don't get involved in those. Yes, in those scenarios, they do need to, in both of those scenarios, whether somebody put on that did do work or not do work, whether somebody put on a lis penance on their property, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes just for whatever reason, puts a lis penance on there, or even if it's fraudulent, right? Like even just because somebody puts a fraudulent deed on your property, you still have to go to the police and get a police report, and you still have to get an attorney and take care of it because of the fact that how do we know that they are, I mean, we can usually tell, to be honest with you, we can tell by the writing usually on the deed, but we still have to say, you have to get this dealt with. You need to contact an attorney, or you need to get this, we need a release of lien, or we need this removed. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well,
Unfortunately.
Tamara, thank you. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation on title insurance that I think a lot of consumers don't put a lot of effort or thought into title insurance and its intricacies in there and stuff like that. But I mean, I guess a big takeaway, if you're a buyer, make sure you got title insurance because it's going to protect you against the knowns and the unknowns. And
Yes.
you get some possible coverage for things about your property that may be permitted or not permitted, or walls and fences that might be on your line and not on your lines. So there's some really great coverage protection there as a buyer. And then as a seller, it protects you because I guess it's, hey, I'm paying some insurance to ensure you're the new owner. When I'm done with you, I'm walking, I'm gone, I'm getting my money, I'm gone. Any other claims pop up, talk to the title insurance. If Uncle Joe shows on your door, tell him
Yeah.
to direct him to Fidelity Title because they're the ones that are going to be paying them, right?
You're absolutely right. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Anything that you want the consumer to know before we go?
Real estate is still the best investment. After 30 years, I can tell you what I've learned from day one. Real estate is the best investment.
Gotcha.
And, yeah, the best investment ever.
Tamara, so much. If anybody would want to reach out to you for consultation, how can someone get a hold of you?
Oh my gosh, they're welcome to call or text me. My phone number is 818-426-3011. And my email is Tamara, Tamara .Ortiz, ORTIZ @fnf.com.
FNF, Fidelity National Title Company.
Yes, and please feel
Our
free to reach
financial
out. I'm
unit.
happy.
I love it. Tamara, thank you for taking the time to be with
You're
me. I know our audience is going to love all this stuff like that. And we're, as an agent, I'm really here to provide value to our customers, to our friends, to our family. And I think today we just hit it out the park. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thanks again for having me.
Okay, talk to you in a bit. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.